Adriana, 5:30, and I started the recording. So whenever you're ready, we'll go when you're ready to start.
Okay. Welcome. I'm Adriana Delagrange. I'm the Vice President of Kappa Delta Pi. And today we have with us Tyler Brockhouse. He will be the person we are going to interview for the mock interview today. And he will be interviewed by Miss Michelle Lash. She is the Assistant Principal at Carroll Middle School. And she's also a prior graduate of Purdue University. So, Michelle, would you like to tell a little bit about your educational experience?
Sure. First of all, thank you all for inviting me. I'm excited to be here virtually, a little bit different than in person, but um, I started off at Purdue University right out of high school, and I studied biology and chemistry education. And from there, I taught in the classroom for about 21 years at the high school level. And this is my second year now in the middle school administrative role at Carroll Middle.
Thank you. So now if you want to start interviewing Tyler, we'll have a little discussion about the interview afterwards, so you can take it from here.
Okay. Hi, Tyler. Thanks for being brave and doing this with us. When Dr. Oliver sent me your resume, I was thinking maybe he'll send me a science person. So I will let you know I did some research.
Okay.
And I asked around, what do you ask about with choir teachers? So I'm going to open up first with you, Tyler. And if you could please tell me about yourself, your path down the path of becoming a choir director and where your passion comes from.
Absolutely. So I got my musical ensemble start back in 7th grade at Northwood Middle School here in Fort Wayne. I was a part of their show choir for 2 years, and then that I went on it into show choir in high school at Northrop. And so I was a participant in that for 4 years as well as getting into some musical theater and other things like that. Excuse me. And so from there, I started college at Purdue Fort Wayne as a business major. Not really sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something with show choir, but I was going more on the choreography side of that. And but my freshman year of college, I got a job assistant directing over at Northwood Middle School with their show choir. And it was actually at our first competition for that season at Carroll High School after that whole experience there where I decided I want to be a music educator. And so that's what led me to auditioning for our program at Purdue Fort Wayne. And since then, I worked another year with Northwood Middle School, and then I spent the last 2 years working with Bishop Dwenger show choirs. And then aside from my work, I do community theater every now and then, keep myself busy, keep myself performing and working with ensembles.
Okay. Are you currently student teaching or have you student taught already?
Yes, I am at Weiser Park Elementary right now. I spent my first 10 weeks at Huntington North High School.
Okay. So let's base it off of that experience that you had in your student teaching. Can you describe a successful lesson that you're super proud of and explain why it was such a great experience and the planning and prep that you did to create that experience?
So I think my first breakthrough lesson, so at Huntington North, just to kind of preface this, we had a beginning choir, an advanced choir, and then his two show choirs out there. So I did a lot of my teaching work with, like my own solo teaching work with the beginning and advanced choirs. And with the advanced choir, it was a simple day. We started with our warm-ups that we do every day. I have a handful of different warm-ups that I do. So we went through our warm-ups and then we started working on a song called Why We Sing. Um, and it's a fun little tune, rather simple, but it just can bring up some really good conversation if you head in that direction, in which I did. I started talking to the students about why is it that we sing? Why are you here in this room right now? Simple questions like that. And I just got the best discussion out of those students, because sometimes music isn't always about the music learning, learning the notes on the page or singing those notes correctly, but rather it's about the experience and the artistic expression. And getting a chance to discuss that with your students can lead to an amazing conversation. And so it was just the combination of the musical experience, yet the combination of personal experience.
Okay, very good. Okay, on the counter of that, then, can you talk to me about a difficult decision or a difficult situation that you encountered and how you responded to that?
So this one is a little less working in the classroom per se, but rather working with colleagues. Us being in the situation that we are with the pandemic, um, my first week at Huntington North, or maybe it was my second week, um, they were still having show choir rehearsals after school, um, and they were working towards a dinner theater show that they annually put on out there at Huntington North. And it was the first rehearsal with the Varsity Singers, which is his boys and girls show choir, and there was an issue with the masks. So, and especially back in August, there was still that hadn't been figured out with COVID and everything. So, school rule was that if they are doing some sort of physical activity, masks don't need to be worn. The issue came into play where if they weren't on stage and they weren't dancing, the students weren't putting their masks back on, and just kind of running around the building without them. So the next day, I had to talk with my cooperating teacher about that. Um, and him and I were basically on the same page. He understood, everything that kind of came out of that and how bad it could look if someone were to see that sort of thing. But it was difficult for me to kind of work myself up because I was new there, wasn't my program, but it's something that I felt like needed to be voiced. So kind of putting myself in that uncomfortable situation was difficult at first, but ultimately had a positive outcome.
Okay, very good. Speaking of show choir, one of the things that I know is a challenge are with the variety of after school activities. So my question for you is, how do you feel about students that want to be in both music and sports, and how do you balance that schedule?
Right. So I think it's a wonderful thing for a student to want to do multiple activities, whether that be, music, sports, whatever. But, sports is always the big one when it comes to that conflict. I've seen it done in the past, whether I was a student in that program or an assistant director, but it's really important to me that students can get all the opportunities that they can take on. So working together. All right, am I back?
You're back.
You're
Okay,
back.
sorry about that.
No,
Um,
that's okay.
so I'm not sure what the last thing I said was, but we'll just go with making sure that you're talking with the coaches, making sure that you and the coaches have a good understanding of what both of your schedules are and how you can split that up with the students. Sometimes it might be a give and take kind of situation where sometimes they might have to miss my rehearsals and go to their practices or vice versa. So that shouldn't be a problem as long as you create that rapport with the coach and that coach creates the same rapport with you. It's because really it's about the student's best interest. It's not about I really need them in my rehearsal 24/7, because that's simply not fair. Students deserve all the opportunities that they can take. So that's kind of how I would approach something like that.
Okay. All right. So here's kind of a fun one for you. I want you to tell me a joke that you could tell your choir class.
Gosh. Um, a joke that I can tell my choir class.
And we can pick a middle schoolers. What kind of joke could you tell your choir class?
Oh my gosh, this is the most difficult question I've ever been asked in my life. And that's funny because I feel like I have stupid jokes to say all the time, but then when you ask me to say one, I can't think of one off the top of my head. Um, oh my gosh, I don't know. I'm gonna have to say that I'm just completely stumped on this one. Um, I like to think that I have a good sense of humor and that I can have a good sense of humor with my students, but that's just not something that is coming to mind for whatever reason.
No problem. I heard this question this summer for a band teacher, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that has to be the worst question. So it's okay to say you don't have one, you don't know. That's not the kind of mode you're in right now. So I just thought it was fun.
Yeah.
um, so how, especially with like music where you're involving a lot of kids, you're outside of school a lot, you're traveling with students, how are you going to involve your parents
Mhm.
and involve them and get them on board and communicate with your parents? What would be your plan?
So having having an open dialogue with parents at all times is really important, making them feel like they're involved and they have somewhat of a say um, in the program and the direction that you're going. Um, just making sure they know what's going on. Let them get to know me and try to get to know as many of them as I can. I guess at a high school level, you got a 4-year window there, maybe more if they have multiple kids that come through your program. But being able to get information out to them quickly, efficiently, um, every little detail, whether it's some sort of fundraising event, whether it's a program, whatever that may be. Um, Getting them involved in some sort of booster program, whether that be specifically for a show choir or the choir program itself. Parents are a huge help in that aspect. So getting them on board, helping them understand the culture that you're creating in your program, because I have seen in the past, um, parents try to create their own culture or parents overstep boundaries. So it's also important for you to make sure, as the director, that this is my program um, and I want you to be a part of it, but this isn't, there are only so many things that you can give them say about, or there are only so many things that you can involve them in. Because sometimes parents often can get too comfortable in those situations and it can just be very messy, very dicey.
Okay, I have a scenario for you.
All right.
All right. So, and this is one that we experienced once. Let's say that you are running your choir class and you're asking the kids to sing, and you have, we'll call him Tyler, is in the choir, and pretty funny kid. He decides he's going to sing off tune on purpose, and every time you ask him not to, he's going to sing off tune and doesn't know what you're talking about. What do you do?
So I think at some point you just kind of have to let that go for the rest of the class period. Um, you can't allow little Tyler to be such a distraction to where that's the only thing you're focusing on because that's simply not fair to the students. Something like singing out of tune on purpose, that can create issues. So if I feel it is so bad to the point where I just need to send him in the hallway or send him back to his seat if we're in a different area, I would do that just to minimize his effect on that class, but I would probably like to have a chat with him after class, just kind of see what's going on, seeing why he is doing that. If it's simply just for just to get a rise out of the class, as students do, understandable. Um, but just try to have a little heart to heart with him. Um, just letting him know that it's not okay that you're doing this. I wouldn't want to have to remove you from my ensemble if it were to get that bad. Um, but I think, there could be other factors that are playing into that. It could be actually a very serious situation where the student feels like he needs to get attention because he might not be getting it, he or she might not be getting it from elsewhere. And if it's something as drastic as that, that's a whole another situation that you would need to involve, a counselor or something like that. But I think the first step is just to try to have an open conversation with the student and maybe try to get to the bottom of it yourself without involving administration.
Okay, so when do you get parents involved or administrators involved?
I think if it's a reoccurring issue, even so, I have that conversation with them, and it's a reoccurring issue. Um, I think I would try to call home first and see, what's going on. Hey, mom or dad, I'm having a hard time with Tyler here. Would you be able to talk to him, that sort of thing? And then, hopefully they are on board, they're supportive of it. But if not, whether they try and nothing works out or they're just not on board and they don't want to help and they're like, he's your problem, that sort of thing, then talk to administration, whoever that may be in that specific position, um, you know, get help in that way and say, I don't want to have to kick this kid out of class, but, he is disrupting and it's constant no matter what I do. And then I would just kind of go from there. I think parents first, then administration, and then you just go the levels of, how severe, how serious is this situation.
Okay, thank you. All right, so curriculum. So probably starting off, you may be assigned the general music course. And if you were able to design and teach a general music course, how would you do it? What would you do?
So I've actually thought a lot about this. I think it would be really interesting to kind of teach, um, I guess, music history, quote unquote, as kind of like the basis, but kind of teaching it backwards, teaching modern things that the students know and are really interested in, and then kind of working its way back into, um, older music, whether that be like the classical period, Baroque period, that sort of stuff. But earlier than that, start in the 2010s, kind of maybe work back by the decades, talk about different genres of music, different artists. But my theory behind that is if you start current, you can really get into what the students are interested now, and then you can find ways to tie that in to music they may not have heard. You can introduce them to other artists, and then you can find ways to tie that in. You know, what does what does Tupac have in common with Mozart? On the surface, the first thing would be absolutely nothing. But you could find a way to tie in, the rhythms that Tupac uses and the way he raps or the beats that he would rap over to the rhythms that would be made in a classical orchestra piece, that sort of thing. And you might grasp some students and you might grasp their attention that way. Some you still may lose, but at least you're starting off talking about things that they're really going to be interested in. So maybe they'll at least want to pay attention, bare minimum, pay attention to the rest of the course rather than getting really interactive with everything that's going on.
Okay. So we have about 2 minutes left according to my timer. And so this is one of the questions I asked the choir teachers. I said, somebody asked this. So hopefully I pronounce this right. Should solfege, is that right?
Solfege.
Solfege. Okay, solfege. I've heard it many ways on the internet. Anyway, hand signs be taught.
Yeah, I think so because a way of learning is a way of learning music, excuse me. It's not all about the sounds that you're producing, but to help with the sounds that you're producing, it helps a lot getting visuals involved. There's a lot of theories behind just kinesthetic, excuse me. Um, just motion involved, which helps with like rhythm and stuff. But if you give the students a visual, with my hand signs here, singing do, mi, and so, it's going to just help them just kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, process the sounds, the notes that they are singing. So you teach solfege, it gives them that visual aspect that's going to help.
Okay. All right, this is gonna be my last question for you. What are your hobbies?
So I mean, sticking with music real quick, I like to perform. Like I said earlier, I try to get involved with community theater as much as I can. It keeps me sharp. It keeps me working on my musical skills. But aside from that, when I have the time, I play a lot of video games. I I watch movies. I watch a lot of YouTube videos. Basically, a lot of stuff that I can just kind of relax and let myself unwind and not have to think about too much about what I'm doing. Um, but yeah, I mean, other than that, when situations allow for it, I do like to go out with friends and have dinner or whatever else, or just get together and be with the people closest to me as well.
Okay. Whoops, sorry. And typically, that was perfect timing. Typically, I would also give the interviewee a time to ask me questions about the position and the school. I
Yes.
think we're going to get into that here, possibly. So, great job, Tyler.
Thank you.
If you want to go over how the interview went with Tyler, that'd be great now, and then we'll ask questions after that.
Okay. Tyler, I think you did a fantastic job of when I asked you a question, you stayed right on point and you worked very hard to answer that question and you didn't go on tangents all over the place. So that was very helpful. I think your responses were very thoughtful. You were honest, especially with the joke. That is a super hard, I think, question to answer. And it's okay not to have an answer to questions. I think you have a lot of experiential material that you could bring in to talk about it, which actually ties into your passion for the subject material. The one suggestion is some of the questions I asked you, for example, with the parents, like how would you involve parents? I would like to hear a little bit more detail of how would you go about that?
Sure.
Because I get, well, you want to communicate often, and so maybe having some set. I would send emails, I would do a brochure, I would hold parent meetings, and give some examples of what you've seen maybe.
Okay.
And it's okay also to say, and I know at my one school, this is what we did, and I liked it, but I might do it this way. So you can use that. I loved how you started with your general music class. I thought that was a creative, really taking in the student interest and how you would tie the current, like what they know to what historically to bring some interest to that, because I have no idea what Tupac and Mozart have in common either. But if you can make that tie, I think the kids would be very intrigued with that. And then I just think you did a really great job. Your demeanor was great. So thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'm going to open up to the members. Does anybody have any questions about interviewing that they would like to ask Mrs. Lash? And you can either unmute yourself or type them into the chat bar and I can read them off for you.
I have a quick question. How common is it for people like us to show up with like portfolios of things? Do you go through them? Is that something that you take a lot of time to look at, or is it not? I just keep getting kind of mixed reviews. I don't know, like, because we've worked on a lot of stuff in our coursework. So we have stuff that we can fill our portfolios with, and especially from student teaching, I just didn't know if those would be looked at, or if that's something to even bother mentioning or bringing to an interview.
Sure. I've been a part of a lot of interviews at the high school, and I've seen people bring them. I would say whatever you can bring it so you have it. There have been instances where, for example, when I asked Tyler, how would you communicate with parents? He could all of a sudden just say, well, I have created this. I've had people bring in laptops where they actually show a snippet of them teaching. I think if you've got it, put it together and bring it. It cannot hurt because you never know what somebody's going to ask, that it might be like, oh my gosh, I have this one thing. Let me show you. I've had teachers come in and pull out student work examples, and some were crumpled, but it was pretty funny. But they bring in some of that. They bring in some of their manipulatives. So, if you have stuff, I would definitely recommend bringing it. It cannot hurt to bring it.
Okay, thank you.
Tyler, go ahead.
I was actually just going to say, because I had an interview with Miami Middle School a few weeks back, and I actually put in my student teaching evaluations from my cooperating teacher and supervisor from my 10-week placement. So that's another idea, especially fresh out of college.
And we would put sometimes extra resumes, just letters of recommendation. So sometimes there might be that extra person at the table that you weren't expecting. But a lot of times, depending on the school, like we always have copies for each team, like whoever's involved. When you apply online, a lot of that stuff you submit, but I would definitely bring copies of whatever you have in a portfolio.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So when it comes to when they say, do you have any questions, do you recommend always having questions about like the learning process and like the school, or is it okay to say, no, I don't have any questions? What would you recommend for that?
I have sat through some interviews that lasted for hours, believe it or not, like just a general teaching interview that lasted for hours. And at the end of that, there really was nothing to discuss. I would definitely have some common, what a lot of times they don't explain what the job specifically is, how they carry out their schedules or the collaboration. Am I expected to do exactly what the person next to me is doing? There's a lot of things because you got to look at an interview as not only are we interviewing you, but you're interviewing us. So to me, it would be really important to make sure that you think through what's important to you, what are your must-haves, and making sure that those get answered right along with us asking you questions.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry. So this is gonna sound super bizarre, but I apologize. So I'm an elementary school teacher, but I have a middle school math, like I passed the middle school math license. So I have a child that goes to Carroll Middle, so I know who you are.
Uh-oh.
She's actually like hiding right here, like I know her. But anyway, so what would you suggest? So if I tried to apply for a job at Carroll Middle for a math teacher, even though I'm really an elementary school teacher, but I passed licensure, so I didn't have all of those extra classes, what would you recommend?
As far as
Like when you're going into an interview, because I don't have that huge math background where like a typical teaching applicant would have. So what would you suggest?
So I do know that some of the 6th grade teachers that we have
Yeah,
currently on
obvious,
staff,
yeah.
yep, we're elementary teachers. So they were elementary teachers that have moved up into the 6th grade area. So
Do you have, yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, do you have advice? Because I love teaching math and I don't know, like, no, this is going to sound crazy, but I mean, like, how would you make yourself look more, like, wow, I want to hire that person. Do you know what I mean?
So would you specifically, if you're specifically wanting to teach math, so depending on your licensure, I know, so let's say you're coming to the middle school, we have some courses we teach that require high school certification or up to a certain grade level. So I think that would go along with a lot with your passion. What are you passionate about? So we'll have, for example, in science, you have to get a life science, a physical science, earth science to teach different things. You need different licenses. I will caution you. So we've had teachers get different licenses and they have been forced to use them when they don't want to teach that area. So I would be careful about possibly adding something that you would not be passionate about teaching.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So if you're not wanting to teach algebra or geometry, be careful with what you're adding.
That's true.
And I don't know if that helps you, but I do know like some of the 6th grade teachers have been elementary teachers and they're teaching in their area that they're passionate about. And Mitchell, I think you could probably speak to that too, having seen that here.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, this is Dr. O. I just want to make a quick comment on that too. Really leverage your cover letter when you do that. You know the position you're applying for. So if you're intentionally applying for a middle school math position and you've expanded your license to cover that area through testing, that's not going to be as much of a concern as when you're in the interview, that you can demonstrate that you understand how to go about approaching teaching that content knowledge. So just really make sure that you're prepared and you're aware. So in the same way that you would prepare for a general elementary position, you know going in, if you're interviewing with Mrs. Lash for a middle school math position, you're going to be expected to demonstrate. And so really brush up, meet with a math teacher, think about that, but really make sure you understand what are the Indiana state standards in that area, how you would come about presenting those. So that's really going to be the key thing.
That's good advice. Thank you. I appreciate you guys.
Mrs. Lash, can I ask you a quick question? I want to come back to your question about the joke, because more secondary principals are inserting a question into the deck of questions to kind of to see what a candidate will do, because part of what you're trying to evaluate is their own ability and their own ability to regulate their emotions when the unexpected happens. So first of all, Tyler, I thought you did a great job not letting that question take you off. You paused. You didn't, try to force a response to be funny. You expressed a sense of humor. I thought you handled it perfectly well. But I wanted to put Mrs. Lash on the spot just for a second, because more I hear from secondary principals, they're going to be asking questions that help you uncover what are the professional dispositions and the emotional reaction potentially of the candidate. Can you talk about why that's important, particularly at the secondary level, that you understand that teacher's ability to manage their emotions?
Sure. And Tyler, we didn't have enough time, but when I say that we have 2-hour interviews, I'm not kidding. So at the high school, so for example, when I asked you about the student who was singing off tune, and then your response was, I talked to him. I go, okay, well, you talked to him. He's still going to do it. And it just keeps on, no matter what you say, we're going to make it worse. And so what we are actually watching is your reaction to a setback. Like, how do you handle something not going the way that you expect? And so, like the joke, you could have completely just, kids are going to ask you random off the wall questions that are going to be like, whoa, I don't know what just happened. You cannot plan for everything that's going to happen to you in the classroom. As you guys have seen from student teaching, crazy stuff happens. What is your reaction to that? I love to ask hobbies. It gets to know you as a person like that. I've had some people give me some pretty interesting hobbies, and it like completely shifts like how you're viewing that person. Like they're very polished, and then all of a sudden you found out, yeah, they play in a rock band and they play drums, but they love rocks, and it's just like you get a lot more of a view of that person. But I will say that they, at least in our district, they will poke you. They keep poking you and pushing you until just to see where your breaking point and what you do when you don't know. And so some people, the best thing I say is when you don't know, say, I don't know. But this is what I would do to find out. And so, because you're not going to know everything.
There was one question asked to the elementary school principal, and I thought it would be fun to hear your side. The question was, would you be able to tell of a time a candidate impressed you and what they did to impress you?
I'm guessing most people would be, depends on that person interviewing. I go a lot off of the rapport that I can build with that person. The personality is huge. You all have a resume, you all have a transcript. We've seen it. I know what your grades were. I know what your grade point. I've seen your letter of recommendations. I've seen a lot about you. For example, you could walk into the interview room and have a 4.0 in something, but the minute we start talking to you, your ability to communicate, your mannerisms, the feel that you get from someone, how you're looking at people, your body language is huge. You have to be able to win those kids over, and you have to be able to make people comfortable around you. And so that would be probably the biggest thing for me, because you've done all the work already. You've done the work, you've done the schooling. We've invited you into the interview because we liked what you did on paper. So now it's just, what's your personality? Is that what the elementary principal said?
Basically, and then he had an example of someone who had a terrible resume, but when they came in and they started talking, their personality kind of showed that they were worth giving a chance to. So.
I'd like to know what was terrible about the resume, because that would scare me. Because I think for us, we look at that ahead of time to decide who we invite to the interview, and it probably depends on the year too. Like some years, I know with some of our subjects, you can't find anybody to interview, and then other years you have a ton of people. So I would say that resume is probably very important to even getting into the interview.
So when it comes to applying, like say that we can't really find a job opening in the area in Fort Wayne, so we just start shooting our application out to different high schools. How do we go about checking in on that? Do we call the school and just say, hey, I submitted an application a few days ago, just, checking in with it? How would you go about doing that?
I've had people do that. For us, we go through Region 8, or when you go through an employment, sometimes it's like, I know, well, different districts are starting to set up their own application sites. I don't think it ever hurts. Shoot an email, introduce yourself, make a phone call. That's what we're here for. But I wouldn't say that's a negative at all. I used to have people email, and I just say, hey, so-and-so emailed. Let's make sure we take a look at that person.
We have about 10 minutes left until we're going to wrap up this meeting. So does anybody have any other questions they'd like to ask about the interview process, or maybe about Carroll Middle School in general?
I'm just curious, Mrs. Lash, if you can talk a little bit too with the whole COVID pandemic that's happened and the change, particularly at the secondary level. A lot of our high schools this week are back to remote learning. As a beginning teacher coming into an interview like that, are you anticipating asking more questions about their background and what experiences they've had using technology, so that you can assess that as part of your interview strategy?
I do ask technology questions. A lot of times that'll come up in examples of lessons, but for the sake of time here, I was trying to pick some of the other questions that might cause a little stress. But yeah, technology is huge. We'll ask, for example, it would be great when you go into an interview to make sure that you get onto their website and look at what they're using. So for example, you would get onto our website, you could find that we use Canvas, we have PowerSchool. Make sure you know a little bit about that. If you don't, if somebody asks you, do you know how to use Canvas? And then you go, well, no, we actually worked with Schoology or whatever it is that you use. And in Schoology, this is what, is that similar to Canvas? And then follow up with, do you have training sessions? Because if I want to make sure I'm well versed, and talk about how would you learn and enthusiastically want to learn about that program, the training opportunities that they would provide for you prior to, and taking a position there. So I do ask more out of, for me to know what you would need and if we could provide that for you in that time. So if you had to start tomorrow, I know I better be in that classroom with you, helping you take attendance, helping you get your Canvas set up, and mentoring, budding up with someone that can help you do that. Because again, you're not going to know everything by any means. And we're all learning every day. We're learning something new.
If there are no further questions, or Dr. Prine, did you have a question?
No, it was more of a curiosity of how how you're seeing the teachers who are doing the virtual learning now and classroom management issues, because if I'm just out of my own experience, but as well as I talk to people, that is one of those challenges of, well, the kid just put the head down and went to sleep on the desk, or they're doing all their learning on their bed, so why not take a snooze every once in a while? So I was just curious, and I was hearing things being done, but I just thought, how do you, I guess, just give us a little bit of more context around that for secondary folks who might be really curious as to some of the unique challenges teachers are facing right now. It's not really an interview, but I was just like, tell us more, as I'm trying to absorb K-12 as well as my own experiences.
Sure. There's a remarkable difference between in the spring when we had to shut down immediately versus now when we've gone to remote. I think there's been a big difference. I am very active online and attending these classes and helping the teachers with the technology side of things. In the beginning, I was like, well, what do we expect from the kids? And a lot of things come up, and we had committees meet during and after to figure out, if we have to do this again, what's that going to look like? We really pushed having teachers model that in the class, especially like day one when school started this year. We had those teachers showing them where Canvas was, what the expectation was. We had them practice with the kids. The very first day of remote learning now, we asked them, make sure you go over your expectations. Some of the classes it was amazing. Like they had prepared slides. We had that go through, this is my expectation, and it's just making sure that you enforce those. So the minute you see someone's camera go off, if the rule was that you need to have your cameras on, you go, hey, Alice, would you please turn on your camera? Thanks. And then just keep going on with your lesson. If Alice, hey, Alice, are you okay? And then if not, shoot an email we have a protocol. And so I get a lot of emails saying, hey, Jimmy was there, but Jimmy would not turn on his camera. So I'm making a call home to Jimmy. Say, hey, Jimmy, make sure you get your stuff turned on. So I think it's enforcing the expectations and following through with that. So if we ask you to have your camera on, or if you do not have your camera on, you're going to be marked absent because we don't know you're there. If we call on you, you do not answer, you're not there just because your little A bubble is there. So I think just learning what is a reasonable request. Is it reasonable to ask a kid to sit up, get out of bed? Is it reasonable to have kids in dress code? Should you be sitting there with the TV flashing in your face playing a video game that we know? So we're wise to it. We also have Relay Classroom where we can see student screens. So I have a sense of humor with this when the teacher's like, hey, Maggie, will you please turn off the YouTube? We're not on there right now, and get back to where I asked you to be. Thank you. And then they just move on. And so I think learning how to use the tech tools and the resources we have is super important, and they're pretty powerful. So they work well.
Thanks. It's just nice to hear your. I think we're all doing it in some level, even on my end here at the university level. But as I hear the chatter amongst my teacher friends as well as the teachers I'm working with, it's been, lots of stories. The most recent one I heard was when a teacher looked up in her 6th grade class that's all virtual, and what? There's this middle-aged man there? And come to find out it was a parent taking a test for the child.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just been things that you never feel like would ever be strung together as words in a teacher vocabulary before. Who would ever expect a dad to be taking a paragraph writing test for a 6th grade kid in the middle of the school day?
Sure. And we record all of our Google Meet sessions. So we've asked that they always record every session and then just keep it in their Google folders so that if there is something that comes up, we have the proof of what happened in the chat transcripts. So it's we've seen that.
Yeah. Different times, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Anyway,
But, another thing too is what you expect in the classroom. You can still have those. You're still in my class. I can still see you. We're still teaching. When I call on you, I expect you to be responding to me just as if you were in the desk sitting there. If I've asked you to sit up, you need to sit up. If I ask you, put your dog away, whatever that is a reasonable request. And so, I still make calls home to parents, and it's I just don't necessarily talk to the kid as far as the discipline side, but the expectations, make them clear, and it's your classroom.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sure.
Appreciate that. Adriana, I'll turn it back to you. I try not to hack too many of the KDP meetings, so thanks. Appreciate it.
We have about 4 minutes left. Are there any last minute questions that anybody would like to ask? Okay, well, with that, I'd like to say thank you to Mrs. Lash for being our volunteer assistant principal's mock interview person. So thank you for all your helpful advice and just for doing the mock interview with us. And thank you, Tyler, for being our guinea pig as the student example. We did do an elementary mock interview right before this, so if you didn't get a chance to watch that, you can hop on our YouTube channel. We're going to upload that hopefully by tonight or tomorrow, so you can take a look at that and maybe get some more help and advice from those videos. And with that, thank you all for coming and for asking questions. And so have a nice night.